And thanks again for joining us here on Government Matters, Focus Springfield's program that really tries to get inside government by talking to the people both on the local and state levels. My name is Mike Dobbs. I'm managing editor for Reminder Publications, and I'm very pleased for this edition to be talking to State Senator Eric Lesser. We have promised the senator we're going to get him out of here on time because he's got a flight to catch. But there's a lot of very interesting things that are happening at the State House, and we want to go over some. As we're recording this in in March, this is budget time.
Yeah,
this is
almost St. Patrick's Eve Day, yeah.
And I think that a lot of times people do not understand what the budget process is like in the legislature. Unfortunately, I think that people a lot of times view it in terms of whose ox is being gored. Are their programs being cut? Are their programs being expanded? Are their fees and taxes expanded or eliminated? So I know that you're involved in 3 new pieces of legislation, which I want to talk to you about, but I'd first sort of like to get a sense about what's happening in a broad way in terms of this budget. Are we facing some problems with this budget from a revenue point of view? Are we facing some issues where there may be some programs that are going to be restricted? What's happening in sort of a broad way?
Yeah, no, well, first, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate being here. And I'm glad you asked that because I do think from 30,000 feet, something that people need to understand about the state budget right now is it does look like there might be some relatively minor cuts in the scheme of things, you know, a few percent here or there. Obviously, for those specific programs, it's not minor. But in the scheme of the broad budget, there might need to be some adjustments. We don't know yet because it's in state government, unlike in the federal government, you can't run deficit. So like a business or a family, we have to wait for all the receipts to come in, and that can adjust and fluctuate a little bit from year to year. But something people should be concerned about on a broad level about budgeting in our state, and it's actually not unique to Massachusetts, it's a national trend. Massachusetts has actually seen very strong economic growth over the last several years. Despite that economic growth, we're seeing continued pressure on budgets, and what should be concerning to people is this is happening at the same time revenues are going up. The reason for this is because the cost of health care coverage is outstripping the increase from the economy growing. So as a result, you're seeing double-digit inflation in programs like Mass Health, other health insurance programs, and it's obviously an important value for us to cover that and make sure that we're keeping up with those costs. But what it means is in even relatively healthy years like this year is, even in times when the state's economy overall is in pretty good shape, we're still faced with the challenge of having to make some cuts. And the reason that should be concerning to people is because imagine the situation we'll face when the economy contracts or when we're faced with a situation where revenues are down. So we have to get healthcare costs thought under control. We have to get health insurance figured out. It's the single biggest driver of state deficits. It's the single biggest cost increase, and it's one of the largest expenses for families, and is creating a lot of stress for families. So I think the takeaway on a 30,000-foot level for our budgeting process and how we, in the big picture, get it in a better place is how we get health care thought through and under control.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it about 40% of the budget?
Give or take, yeah. Now, a lot of that is federal matching, which we can talk about because that obviously impacts the discussion in Washington. But yes, 40% of the total state budget. And people should think about that, right? Because think about all the other things the state is providing: transportation, public safety, environmental protection, education, and schools. 40% of the total state budget now is healthcare or healthcare related.
Let's just talk a moment. You brought up about federal dollars. That's still a big question mark for every state in the union because we don't know really where the Trump administration and Congress is going to go in terms of funding various programs that assist states. So is this something that's worrisome in the legislature? It's
very worrisome, and it's consuming a lot of our time. I had the honor of working for President Obama. I was involved in the creation and passage of the Affordable Care Act, what's known as Obamacare. I was actually proud to be from Massachusetts working on that law because so much of it was modeled on our healthcare law, which was passed before that. And we should be proud in Massachusetts of our healthcare system and the fact that we provide health insurance to so many people. And I'm actually very happy that there's been pretty broad bipartisan agreement in Massachusetts that we will protect the Affordable Care Act, and we will protect universal health access and the principle of universal health access in Massachusetts. The challenge here is we are not the only actor. And what people, I think, need to understand is a huge portion of our healthcare program in the state, including our version, Romney Care, our version of Obamacare, is dependent on federal Medicaid appropriations and other federal appropriations, which can be changed by Congress. So, for example, the Trump plan that was put forward this past week and the week before would greatly limit Medicaid reimbursements to the states. It would do a lot to limit coverage and tier it by age rather than by need. That would be felt in Massachusetts, even if the legislature made a commitment to protect health insurance, because we would have no money to make up the gap. So,
Right.
so it's a very, very concerning time. We need the public engaged on this. We need people thinking about this, contacting us, talking to us about this. And we are committed, I am committed to doing everything we possibly can in Massachusetts to protect universal health insurance and to continue to expand universal health insurance. But if we're facing billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars in cuts from the Tea Party Congress, it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, for our state on our own to make up the difference.
And I think what people have to remember is that Massachusetts has been seen as a leader in trying to deal with a health insurance crisis. There's other states that do not have a program such as ours,
Right.
and their citizens are going to be probably facing even more stringent matters in terms of trying to deal with health care.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of, absolutely. I mean, our citizens will be more protected than, for example, a citizen in a state that hasn't had as robust of an investment as us. There's also, frankly, a little bit of a free rider problem here, which is, Massachusetts has done the hard work of building a health insurance system that covers as many people as possible. Other states didn't. We worked very hard to catch up and update our systems, update our hospitals, our insurance companies after Obamacare was passed. Other states didn't have to do that because they, frankly, didn't have anything before that. Now we're being faced with the potential of having to rework the whole system all over again, which is why, for example, you saw Bay State Medical Center this past week come out and say, look, this would be a disaster for us because we've invested millions of dollars, all of our hospitals have, in getting up to speed on the Affordable Care Act, offering as close to universal coverage as we realistically can right now. And after we've made all of that progress, to undo that, undo all of that with the stroke of a pen is very, very dangerous, and people should be very concerned about it.
I just think that people need to know that what happens in Washington directly affects us, what happens in Massachusetts, and that our state legislature has got to deal with issues that are seen as federal issues, but in reality, they are states' issues.
Exactly, because the way the way Medicaid, for example, works, and so much of the Affordable Care Act is dependent on the expansion of Medicaid. But the way it works is it's a pass-through to the states. So, and we all know it in Massachusetts as Mass Health, but that is partly, certainly, and there's a very substantial state investment in Mass Health, but there's a huge federal component as well. That is, federal Medicaid assistance dollars that get given to the states. So, for example, there's been proposals in Washington to turn that into a block grant system to states. Well, in theory, that might sound like a good idea. The problem with that is it dramatically limits how much assistance states can get. So if healthcare costs go up, or families face a situation where they have unexpected costs, like we all understand we have in healthcare, there's an illness, something like that, if you're capped to a grant system, you're out of luck if your costs go up. So it's important for people to know that it's moving pieces.
Let's talk a little bit about, I know that you're involved with 3 new legislative efforts. And we'll take some time to talk about each. You're involved with a bill that's going to assist veterans in helping to find jobs once they leave the military that would basically use the training they had in the military and sort of translate that to a job in the civilian side. Can you talk to you a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you know, I run this initiative for the state senate around millennial engagement. So you know, millennial is loosely defined as, you know, the generation born 1980 or later, and we've done events all over the state engaging with all different communities. We did one in Springfield, we did one in Holyoke, did one in Fall River, one in Lawrence, one in Quincy. We also did one in Westfield at Westfield State University, specifically focused on veterans, young veterans. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about veterans, we think of, you know, my parents, grandparents' generation, of course, the World War II generation, Vietnam generation. That's certainly a community we need to continue to focus on, but there's actually millions of young veterans now who came out of Iraq and Afghanistan. And something that was pointed out to us in one of these sessions, a young guy who had come back from overseas, local person from Western Mass, he had said he had gotten training as a military police officer, came back, wanted to apply for civilian city police department jobs, and he had to re-go through a whole lot of training that was very redundant to what he had already received in the military. So we looked into this a little bit, and what we found is there's a whole host of jobs, really important jobs that are in demand in the private sector, like machining, you know, learning to be a mechanic in the Army. And unfortunately, the state certification processes, the community college processes were not taking into account that training that these veterans had already received in the military. So the idea behind this bill is to ease that transition process. So a vet who learned really valuable skill in the service, like being a police officer or being a mechanic or learning a specific trade, can get those credits, you know, applied to them much faster.
So it's like transferring credits between colleges in a way.
Exactly. It's such a simple concept, but you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of red tape, and there had been unfortunate roadblocks to it. So this bill is designed to streamline that. But the concept's exactly right, Mike. That it's you would apply skills learned in one place to a new place.
Another one that you're involved in, I thought this was very interesting, the idea that the state would help college graduates who come back to the gateway cities, and so we're talking about Springfield, Westfield, Holyoke, Chicopee as gateway cities. If they come back after graduating from college and they settle here and they're working here and they come back basically to their hometown, that the state would acknowledge this by assisting them in the repayment of student loans. So this is another bill that you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, this also came out of our millennial outreach series. You know, when you look at cities that have really successfully developed a millennial-focused economy, like Boston is maybe the quintessential example, one way they were very successful is they got people working and living close to each other in an urban downtown environment, and they were able to have young people living in market rate housing in the urban center, in the city. And we actually have great employers and a lot of young people coming to work in our regional employers. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not living in our cities, so let's create some incentives. So, for example, a young MassMutual associate who is maybe right out of college, looking for fun stuff to do, working during the day at MassMutual, let's have them live at Silver Brick Lofts, for example, or downtown, in downtown Springfield, close to restaurants and transportation options. And if they do that, if they work in the city and they live in the city, they'll be eligible for some modest but still helpful incentives and write-offs on their student loans. Because the idea is that they're going to be participating in the rebirth and the renaissance and the growth of our gateway cities, and that's important to the state, so the state should help them do that.
Well, there's been a lot of concern, especially here in our area. We have so many colleges, so many great colleges, both private and public, and there are people who come literally from around the country to attend colleges in Massachusetts and in Western Massachusetts. And we want these people to stay here.
Exactly.
They've been here 4 years, or maybe they've been 6 years if they're in a master's program. They've gotten to know the area, and so it's just not just job development, it's also providing them with other kinds of incentives that they will feel comfortable about, that they'll elect to stay here.
Exactly.
Because it's very important to just, not to be seen as a stagnant area.
Exactly, and my view is that this all is part of a basket of policies that we're working on, right? So you're exactly right, Mike. We have good employers, they're growing, Bay State's hiring, Mass Mutual's hiring. We have lots of young and smaller businesses that are also hiring, family-owned businesses. But what else can we offer, right? So we can offer maybe this Gateway Cities incentive on their student loans, which can help. We're going to have, hopefully, rail access soon, which we can talk about a little bit. We know that's very important for a younger generation. People want to be independent of cars. They want to be connected to the communities around them. We're working on programs around ride sharing, for example, Uber and Lyft, bringing that to Springfield, expanding that in Western Massachusetts. It's huge in Eastern Massachusetts, and it's become ubiquitous in the Boston area. So we're working to bring that to Western Massachusetts. So after a while, we're working on, for example, more cultural development in the new cultural district downtown. We've worked with Anita Walker and Mark Davey from the creative placemaking agencies to get more of a creative economy going. There's going to be a new innovation cafe opening with mass development help. So the idea here is that this is all working to build an ecosystem. And the idea behind that ecosystem is exactly what you just pointed out, Mike, is we need that young graduate from AIC, from Western New England, from UMass, who may have come here from somewhere else, from New York, from California, even from overseas, to say, hey, this is a cool place. There's a lot going on here. I want to settle here for a while. I want to build my career and start my career here, and hopefully, eventually, raise a family and buy a house here. That's what we want. That's the goal. And I'll say one other exciting project we're working on that's related to this is Bay State Medical Center is working on opening a new medical school in Springfield for primary care physicians. It's going to be affiliated with UMass, and the idea behind this is Massachusetts medical students will be able to do primary care work, be able to be residents here at Bay State. That's a game changer because it brings in more professionals, brings in more doctors, which is desperately needed.
Yes.
And again, in conjunction with all these other things we're doing around transportation, around cultural development, around Gateway City incentives, we can create actually a pretty enticing package for people to stay here and lay down roots.
Well, clearly, the other bill that you're working on obviously has come out of these discussions with millennials, which is the Student Loan Borrowers Bill of Rights.
Yes.
And of course, I've got a granddaughter who's at Bay Path right now, and certainly the cost of college is something that is paramount in her mind, and what she has to borrow and what she has to get through scholarships and what she has to pay. I think that it's, anyone who wants to advance themselves through a college education, the price tag is something that is confronting them each and every day. So with this Bill of Rights, I take it you would try to give some structure to college students in terms of how they view their student loans and what rights they have as consumers.
Exactly. So, the challenge we have is, it used to be, in my parents' era, they could kind of work nights and weekends. My dad worked as a cab driver in New York City through college, went to City College, and worked as a cab driver and was able to cover his tuition and books doing that. I mean, that model has become almost impossible, even at a public university, because it's become so expensive. And unfortunately, because families are now forced to take loans out, they're very vulnerable to very aggressive and oftentimes just downright awful practices. Things like floating interest rates that are completely unclear when you sign up, harassing calls in the middle of the night. We were hearing stories of people being scammed about how much they had to pay monthly when it was way above what they were legally obligated to pay. So there's a whole host of practices that have now cropped up. And again, these are responsible people who are trying to go to school, who are saving, who are doing what they're supposed to do, taking out loans in a responsible way, and are getting taken advantage of by a system that protects, frankly, banks and servicers more than it protects students. So the idea behind our Bill of Rights is to even that playing field out a little bit. And in particular, we want to target the servicers because a lot of this work has to be done federally because of how the regulations work, but we do have a role to play in Massachusetts in protecting from abuse by servicers. These are the folks that the banks hire to basically go out and collect the loans from people, and they can really harass people and force people to make payments that they don't have to make. So, for example, what this bill does is it creates an ombudsman role, a person who is solely responsible for students and their families and borrowers and protecting their interests. Because unfortunately, the rest of the system has a lot of masters, banks,
right,
businessmen, so the ombudsman will be focused just on students. And importantly, it creates new legal rights so that students can sue to get repayments back, and it gives the state the power to impose fines and to require repayment with damages to servicers and to banks who violate the state's consumer protection rules. So I think this is a very, very important and frankly common sense bill. It's modeled off a successful effort in Connecticut. Our neighbors to the south passed this a few years ago, and it's been successful there, so we want to bring it to Massachusetts.
Excellent. I was at the Union Station event last week, and of course, everybody knows that you have been the champion in trying to establish realistic passenger rail service between Springfield and Boston. Do people hide from you in the Senate, you know, when the subject of trains come up? I mean, do they say, oh my God, Lester's going to talk about trains again? The fact of the matter is Union Station is going to be a tremendous asset, and in 2018 we're going to have these commuter lines coming up from Connecticut. We're going to be able to buy Metro North tickets at Union Station.
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah,
and so we can get on a train here, we can go to New Haven, we can get another train in New Haven to New York City. I love Amtrak, I'm not dissing Amtrak, but the commuter lines give us greater flexibility to do things for business, or much less for pleasure and recreation, but especially to do business. You can get on a train in Springfield, go to an appointment in Hartford, take the train back, you don't have to drive. So we're seeing, especially in 2018, we're going to be at a completely new spot in terms of mass transportation for the area. Now you've refiled the bill. That would be the study.
Yes.
Do you think that this go around, this session, that we may be making some progress?
Well, I certainly hope so. I was in Connecticut last week meeting with Governor Malloy in Hartford, also met with the Lieutenant Governor in Connecticut and the Majority Leader in the Connecticut Senate. And they're all desperate, asking us, please, you know, they feel like they've done their side of the bargain, which is investing in the New Haven, Hartford, Springfield line, which is going to be a tremendous opportunity and boon for us here in Springfield. So they're saying, you know, come on, Massachusetts, finish the other side, which is Springfield, Worcester, Boston. I think, again, you know, the issue here, this is an issue whose time has come. You know, Union Station is opening. That's going to be getting a lot of attention. It's a tremendous achievement. Now we need trains coming in and out of Union Station. It doesn't do much good if we don't have trains coming in and out of this amazing intermodal facility that just opened. We need east-west service to make that a success. Frankly, it already has very broad support. It passed the Senate 39-0, passed the House easily. We have a broad coalition. I was just with several very prominent business people earlier today with meetings who are very enthusiastic about this proposal. It was endorsed by the Springfield Chamber of Commerce. It was endorsed by the Economic Development Council of Western Mass. Unfortunately, some special interests got in the way, and you know, and the governor vetoed it. But I've talked to him and I've talked to his senior officials about this multiple times. They know our feelings on this. They know how important this is to Western Mass. And what we need citizens' help now. We need our community, we need Western Mass to have some pride in itself and say, you know what, it's time for infrastructure here, not just in Boston. You know, they just approved a $2 million study of a 1.5-mile link between North Station and South Station in Boston. That may be a worthy project, and likely is a worthy project. That's not the point. The point is people should kind of look at this and say, wait a second, you're supporting a $2 million study of a 1.5 mile portion of track, and we can't get even a substantially less and more modest amount to study a 55 mile, really a 99 mile portion of track between Boston, Worcester, and Springfield that would transform an entire region. That people should feel frustrated about that, because it's a political challenge, not an engineering or logistics challenge. So a lot of our time in the coming weeks and months is going to be mobilizing people to appreciate that, so that we can be organized and really stand up as a region and say, no, we expect and demand the same attention and the same level of investment and the same resources from Beacon Hill that the other regions of Massachusetts get.
It's all about economic development. It's all about giving people an additional reason to stay here, to settle here, to do business here. And to me, it's just a common sense issue at this point, and it would completely strengthen the Commonwealth as a whole.
Exactly. I mean, one of the single biggest challenges they have in Boston around economic growth is the cost of housing and just out of control costs. We have tremendous housing stock here, relatively less expensive cost of living, much less expensive housing. They have a lot of really a very dynamic economy with a lot of jobs, so there can be an exchange. It would help both ends of the state. It would help everyone. Frankly, it's too good of an idea to actually happen. Some people joke with me, but the reality of it is the way it will happen is if we demand it happen, and we're getting there. And this bill, I really believe, will be the vehicle for the first step. So we filed it again. We've got over 24 co-sponsors from both parties. It's been going to be in the Transportation Committee for a hearing soon, hopefully this spring. So we're going to need the public's engagement and participation to make it happen.
Great. Senator, I know you got a plan to catch. We're going to promise to get you out on time.
Oh,
we're going to do that. Thanks so much for coming by today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
And folks, thanks very much for watching another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.